quickly. So Graham Gibbs is currently the Senior Policy Advisor and Coordinator for the Canadian Space Agency in the Government Liaison Office and Office of the Vice President in Ottawa. That's a relatively new position for him because until August 2010, we saw him around here a lot because he was the Canadian Space Agency representative here in Washington. So he started out in the days of Space Station Freedom in 1988 as the Canadian Space Agency rep to that program, and then became the first Canadian Space Agency Washington rep across all of programs, so not just working with NASA, but also with NOAA, USGS, a wide range of space issues. Graham has worked on a number of very relevant activities for our panel discussion today. He was across the table from me when we renegotiated the space station agreements, but he was also on the delegation when the original space station agreements were negotiated, so he got to see the original approach and how we adjusted to that. He was also a member of the core Canadian team that helped to develop the Global Exploration Strategy framework for coordination, and has followed up with the implementing actions in the coordination group. So he has quite a lot of experience across the programs we're talking about today, station and exploration, and by the way, worked on Earth observations and was in industry and did many other things. So I think he has a wealth of experience to bring here. Let's welcome Graham Gibbs.
Thank you, Lynn. Just a point of clarification, I can't take credit for the first round of the IGA MOUs. I was in industry, avionics stuff in those days. So it's great to be back in Washington, having, after 22 years, finally gone home and just weathered our first winter. And it's nice to come here and see some green grass because we're still a bit brown. The snow's gone, but it's brown. Anyway. So my presentation is going to focus on the title, which is the governance model. But it's not really my work. At least towards the end, it's my ideas. So, but I need to give credit to several of us while I was here in Washington have given thought to this subject, probably since President Bush announced the vision for U.S. space exploration. And we did studies and had workshops and wrote papers, and you will recognize the usual suspects. Our moderator, Lynn Klein, was involved, Peggy Finarelli, and Ian Pryke, who also was, before Andreas, head of the ESA Washington office and is now working with the Space Studies Board. And there's one third paper that I had written just to help a workshop. Anyway, so I hope that Lynn, at least, who is the only member of the cadre in here from these papers, will agree that I've reasonably accurately reflected in a short form the work that he did. But we have to look at the space station program very briefly to put the whole governance thing into structure. So I'm not going to bore you with the gory details that you all know about, except to stress just a few points. First of all, it evolved. Did it ever? It evolved politically, it evolved technically, and it evolved managerially. Politically, it was, as we all know, I think, an instrument of the Cold War. It then became an instrument of post-Cold War cooperation. We had and went through, and it's a testament to the partnership, I think, that it grew stronger, not weaker, through many redesigns, and not just in the US, but frankly, in the end of the day, amongst all the partners. It's changed managerially, and in that sense, I mean, it was initially a US-led program, the rest of us just adding bits and pieces, but not on the critical path except for Canada. But it has really now changed into a program where it is, as the IGA says, a genuine partnership. And I think we have to take our hats off to all the partners for that very positive evolution in the space station program. Lynn mentioned this in her introductory remarks. My point is to point out when we look at governance for exploration, that the space station, while very complicated, very complex, 15 partners, it is a single destination in space. And it was a program that we were able to reasonably well define, even though it changed technically, but we were reasonably, it was fairly straightforward to define what it was we were going to do and what each of the partners were going to contribute. That is not going to be the case, we contend, in exploration. I want to just have a couple of charts on the legal framework and the management regime, because I have a proposal at the end which kind of shows how I think we might be able to adapt the ISS model to exploration. So the top level agreement is a multilateral, and I stress multilateral, IGA treaty level for most of us, an executive agreement or whatever the phraseology is in the States, that is treaty-like in the States as well. It provides the overall legal framework, and that's very important, as I'll explain later. It provides the political coverage, and then under that are a series of bilateral MOUs that provide the programmatic details of what everybody's going to do. A really important part, and I think it will be even more important in the exploration mode, is that these agreements allow the agencies to enter into project-level implementing arrangements. So for things that were not generally covered in the MOUs or the IGA, without having to go back through a whole government bureaucratic approval process. So there's a lot of flexibility, and we have a lot of freedom in doing these implementing arrangements, and I think these just might be key in an exploration framework. The management regime. As Andreas pointed out, the IGA allows for a government-level review, actually every 2 years, all when called for by a partner. I think we had maybe 2 on the 2-year cycle in the 20-odd years we've been building the station. We had several in the 93, 94 timeframe when we had the major redesign and bringing Russia into the program. Basically, the government level has, I would say, hasn't been effective, but perhaps that's been an indication that it hasn't been necessarily necessary, but I think something will be necessary in exploration. The head, more recently, probably starting with Sean O'Keefe's era, I think, maybe just a bit before, the heads of the Space Station Partner Agency started to get together every year. Interestingly enough, that is not a formal management mechanism in the IGA and MOUs. The highest level, agency level management forum is the Multilateral Coordination Board, and under that, the Space Station Control Board, which basically you can think about the Multilateral Coordination Board deals with operational long-term matters. The SSCB deals specifically with the technical development and assembly matters, which of course are government. And then we have a whole host of things underneath. So in our analysis that people like Lynn and myself and Peggy and Ian did, when we looked at the lessons learned, we had a whole chapter in our paper on accepting that which cannot be changed. Political leadership. I would suggest that political leadership, high-level political leadership, is essential. And it's even more essential in exploration. And there's many examples in the past where political leadership has been beneficial to a program. That means, though, that we've got to be very vigilant, because that means we're going to be managing in the long term a politically motivated program. And we all know, we've got an election going on in Canada right now, and you've got your troubles and so on and so forth. So we've got to manage through all these cycles, and we have managed the program through all these cycles in the past. And so there are a lot of lessons to learn about how to manage a politically motivated program. But I think political leadership is going to be absolutely essential. In terms of the agreements, we adopted the phrase, we learned how to, we learned about constructive ambiguity. The most classic example in the space station agreements was the definition of the peaceful uses of outer space. I'm not going to bore you with the gory details, but there was, in the end, it wasn't defined in the IGA, but it was kind of agreed through an exchange of letters that are not public domain. As to what everybody thought was meant by peaceful uses of outer space. So there are ways to to manage these things when you can't get a consensus. Charlie Bolden had a statement in his, Administrator Bolden had a statement in his keynote address at the beginning which said, the space station is a blend of goals. And I thought that was absolutely reflective of something else that we found out when we were doing our analysis, and that is you don't have to have, you can have a multinational program, but you don't have to have a single rationale. Not all of each partner on the space station program had different reasons for wanting to be a partner, quite different, I mean very different reasons. Some was commercial, some was pure research, some was prestige, and so on and so forth. And we all had different objectives. I mean, we have to recognize in any program, any multinational program, that nations have national prerogatives, and we have to accept those and understand them. But this has not been an impediment in the space station program, and we contend it will not be an impediment. In fact, perhaps to the contrary, it may enrich an exploration program by having different objectives. So some of the lessons learned. In exploration, like the space station, it is quite possible that one or two partners will be providing the bulk of the common operations, space transportation, heat, light and sound, logistics, and so on and so forth. That's the same for the space station program. The most, at least on the western side of the station, if you like, if you want to call it that, we, the non-US partners, all agreed to reimburse NASA for what it was providing that we were benefiting from, all the logistics stuff. That we agreed on what the common operations activities would be, and we agreed on what the common costs would be, and we agreed on what our percentage shares would be. That is probably going to happen in exploration. But the other thing that we've managed to make work really, really well is barters. No country likes to send a check across the border. I think the rule of thumb is that $1 sent across the border is equal to spending $4 at home. So countries don't like to send checks. So we've managed to make barters work, and we may look into that in the exploration. Space station has also helped us learn the management skills, which are quite different in a multilateral program. And here I'm going to pay very particular credit to people like Bill Gerstenmaier when he was program manager, and then AA, Mike Suffredini, who's the current program manager, in leading the operational technical team. And I want to point out Lynn Klein, who's now deputy AA, but the terrific work she did in negotiating all the pitfalls when we were renegotiating agreements to bring Russia into the program. Lynn taught us how to seek a consensus, and she taught us how to listen to people across the table. The other countries, our own program managers, have learned from this. It wasn't always this way. I can tell you that the Space Station Freedom Program office at Reston, and Gary Barnhart will attest to this, it was quite a different story for the non-partners, for the non-US partners, but never mind. We've learned to manage large multilateral programs, and that's going to be good for the future. Well, we've all talked about, so just talking about some sort of overarching considerations as we look at implementation. We all know that exploration is going to be a series of missions, stepping stone approach. We've talked about that this week. We won't be able to define all of this up front. So we are going to have to realize that this is going to be a program of programs, or whatever you would like to call it, and build that into our planning. So if we apply these lessons, I'm getting to kind of the implementation piece. Three major lessons. The governance structure for exploration is certainly going to have to allow for flexibility. No question about that. As I mentioned before, it will require strong political leadership. That's my personal opinion, and I think it's probably shared by other people. And we're going to have to be vigilant and understand there will be differing interests and rationales, all of which can be accommodated. And I think I've probably pretty much covered that in this chart already. So in the interest of time, I'm going to just keep going. So now I'm going to the personal thoughts. These are not the reflections of the people that I work with. They're not necessarily the reflection of the Canadian Space Agency or the Government of Canada. We can't avoid the legal issues, so the legal matters, and there are a number of options. These are just some of them. We could have a whole bunch of agency-to-agency MOUs. Trust me, that would be a real pain, particularly if these MOUs, as they have to be, internationally legally binding instruments. For us in Canada and for other countries, that means they're treaties. We have to go through the whole treaty. We don't here, but we have to go through the whole treaty process, which is onerous in the extreme. We could have multilateral IGA and bilateral agency MOUs like the space station, or we could have bilateral umbrella IGAs. And this is the bit that I really like, and that's what I'm going to lead on to. There are precedents for this. After a long time, I was successful about 18 months ago, Canada and the US signed the Civil Space Cooperation IGA, covering and designating NASA and the CSA as the implementing agencies. So this is a treaty, now ratified, which provides the political and legal framework for our civil space cooperation. It authorizes the agencies, in this case NASA and the CSA, to enter into implementing arrangements pursuant to the IGA, without having to go through the whole legal process every single time we want to provide an instrument on a NASA Earth Science satellite or whatever it happens to be. And I think personally that this is a model that we should seriously consider. So here's one possible regime. We have at the top level an intergovernmental agreement. The US does not like multilateral agreements typically, but I think probably we should think in terms of trying to have a multilateral IGA and include everybody, every country that thinks it might want to at some point join the party in exploration. It doesn't have to be only those that have a front-end commitment, in my view. That IGA would then provide the legal framework and the political coverage, if you like. Underneath that, you could have an intergovernmental group on space exploration, a little bit like we have a group on with a group on Earth observations or other examples. Again, to have once every 2 years at least the ministerial level, a review of what the agencies are doing in exploration to keep the political connection. It's really a matter of to keep the political connection. And then you'd have a multi-agency coordination group of some sort, perhaps the one that currently exists, but I'm still involved in, the International Space Exploration Coordination Group, which is, as we speak this week at NASA headquarters, is trying to put the finishing touches to its latest product, which will be released this June, which is the Global Exploration Roadmap, so stay tuned for that. And then underneath that, there could be the implementing arrangements, which could be bilateral, multilateral, and these would be like mission specific, depending on the mission in question. And my final chart. So why am I pushing for an umbrella IGA? This is not the position of the Canadian government. Because experience has shown that to achieve a legally binding, internationally legally binding instrument is very long and onerous for most of us. For example, the Canadian Space Agency does not have the mandate or the authority to bind Her Majesty's government, which is what our government's called, on things like cross-border liability. Same applies to customs and immigration and things like that. So NASA does have the authority to bind the US government on things like cross-border liability, which is why they don't have to go through this whole treaty process that we do. And I think Canada's not alone. I think mostly European countries are probably a bit like Canada as well. So the IGA would allow for implementing arrangements, so we can do that at the agency level. It would provide the overall legal framework and I've just listed some of the things down here. This would be